I bought this apartment without reading the contract carefully. Nice place, great location, suspiciously cheap. Everyone thought I'd gotten lucky until the first night I moved in. The lights kept flickering on and off. The fridge opened by itself. And at 2 in the morning, I saw a man standing in the middle of my living room. He introduced himself as Zi Hao, a ghost who had died 10 years ago. The worst part wasn't that my apartment was haunted. It was that the ghost flatly refused to move out. I signed the apartment contract with the kind of speed people usually reserve for ordering food delivery. No rereading, no questions, just signed. The agent sitting across from me looked like someone trying to decide whether to say something else. In the end, he just folded the paperwork quickly like he was afraid I'd change my mind. "You don't have any questions?" he asked in a strangely cautious tone. "I do." I stood up, picking up the keys. "Why is a third-floor apartment, nice view, good location, cheaper than the room I'm renting now?" The agent smiled. The kind of smile from someone who didn't want to answer. "Well, the market's been a bit unstable lately." I looked at him for 3 seconds, then slipped the keys into my pocket. "Fine." I turned to leave. "As long as it's not getting demolished." He didn't say anything else. As I reached the door, I caught him whispering into his phone, "Done, someone bought it, not my responsibility anymore." But I was far enough away to pretend I hadn't heard. A cheap apartment is a good apartment. That was the life philosophy of Ming Ke, 28 years old, single, and the new legal owner of Unit 7, 3rd floor, Ping and District. I moved in at 7 in the evening with 2 cardboard boxes, 1 suitcase, and the spirit of someone who just escaped 3 years of living in a moldy rental room. The apartment was empty. Strangely clean, like someone had cleaned it before I arrived, even though the agent said no one had set foot in here for a year. I turned on the lights, they turned on, good. I set down the boxes, checked the fridge, empty but cold, meaning the power worked fine. I dragged my suitcase into the bedroom, spread a blanket on the floor since I didn't have a bed yet, then went to boil water in the kitchen. 15 minutes later, I sat eating instant noodles with the posture of someone perfectly content with life. The living room lights went out. I stopped eating. Looked into the living room, pitch black, power glitch. I concluded and kept eating. The fridge door swung open. I set my chopsticks down, looked at the fridge. The door was hanging open, cold air spilling out, but I was sure I just closed it 30 seconds ago. I got up, closed the fridge, made sure the seal was tight, then went back to the table, picked up my chopsticks, faulty door spring. Call someone tomorrow. The living room lights turned back on. I looked up, looked down at my noodles, kept eating. A cheap apartment comes with a few small downsides. Flickering lights weren't a big deal. I'd replace some bulbs, check the breaker, done, simple as that, completely normal, completely. I met him at 2 in the morning, not because I was up late. I'd gotten up for water, walked into the dark living room, flipped on the light, and there was a man standing in the middle of the room. I screamed, not the small "oh, someone's here" kind of scream, the full my lungs just left my body kind of scream. My first instinct wasn't to run or call for help. It was to grab the slipper lying by my foot and hurl it straight at his face. The slipper passed through his head, flew straight on, and stuck into the wall behind him. I froze. The man froze. We stared at each other. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a style that looked about a decade out of date. His face was cold, expressionless, the kind of cold that came from someone used to watching the world from a distance. And most importantly, he was transparent enough that I could see the bookshelf behind him right through his body. "You," I pointed at him, my voice cracking in half. "You're Zi Hao," he introduced himself, voice flat as paper. "I live here. You." I looked down at his feet, not touching the floor. "Your feet aren't touching the ground. Good observation. You're a ghost." He didn't answer. Took that as confirmation. I glanced at the slipper sticking out of the wall, looked back at him, took a long breath. "All right." I turned toward the bedroom. "Let me go pull that slipper out first, then we'll deal with this." We sat in the living room at 2:30 in the morning, debating property ownership. I sat. He stood since he wasn't sure if he could sit and wasn't about to try. I bought this place legally. I placed the contract on the table, even though he couldn't pick it up to look. Signature, notarization, everything. This apartment is mine. I've been here for 10 years before you. Zi Hao crossed his arms, his tone making it clear he considered this self-evidently correct. Seniority gives me priority. You're dead. Residency doesn't expire. You don't have ID, no registered address, you don't legally exist, I pointed at him. What law protects you? Zi Hao looked at me with the expression of someone calculating which response would be most irritating. If I don't legally exist, he said slowly. Then what law are you going to use to evict someone who doesn't exist? I opened my mouth to argue, had nothing. Fair point, I admitted reluctantly. But I paid for this, real money, money I spent years saving up. Do you have any money? Zi Hao said nothing. Right, I nodded. So this is my apartment, you're an uninvited guest and we need to negotiate. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression somewhere between contempt and curiosity. You're not scared, not a question, an observation, I am scared. I pulled the blanket around myself since I actually was trembling slightly and didn't want to admit it. But I also spent a lot of money on this place. Being scared won't get my money back. The house rules were drawn up at 3 in the morning on a scrap of paper I found in one of the boxes, written with a small marker. I wrote. Zi Hao watched, since he couldn't hold a pen. Cohabitation Rules, Unit 7. Rule 1, for the ghost, no appearing suddenly while the other party is eating, showering, or in any state where their heart might give out. Minimum advance warning required via some small sound. I'm a ghost. Zi Hao looked at Rule 1. Sudden appearances are a professional privilege. Then consider that privilege retired. I underlined Rule 1 again for emphasis. Rule 2, for the human, no walking through any space currently occupied by the ghost. It's disrespectful. I won't know where you're standing if you don't show yourself. Then look more carefully. I looked at him. He was transparent enough that I could see the bookshelf behind him right through his body. You're standing in front of my bookshelf, and I can clearly see the bookshelf through your body. Visually speaking, that's very hard to distinguish. Zi Hao had nothing to counter with. Rule 2 stayed. Rule 3, general, no commenting on each other's living habits. You added this one because you're afraid I'll judge you for eating instant noodles every night. Zi Hao said. Rule 3, no commenting. I pointed at the paper. He went quiet. I signed under the rules. Looked at Zi Hao, held out the pen. He looked at the pen, looked at his hand. I can't, I know. I set the pen down. Fine, I'll sign for you too. I wrote. Zi Hao agreed verbally, did not object on the second signature line. Zi Hao looked at those words with an expression I couldn't read. You're strange, he said finally. My apartment, I can be as strange as I want. I folded the paper. Now go to sleep, both of us. In the morning, I decided to test a theory. Try going out the door. I opened the apartment door, standing to one side. Step out into the hallway. Zi Hao looked at the open door, looked at me. Why? So I know your range. If you can follow me outside, I need to know that before I bring anyone home. He stepped forward, slowly but deliberately right up to the doorframe, stopped. I watched, waiting. He didn't move, just stood there, one foot half lifted like a paused frame of video, stuck. No. He lowered his foot, stepped back. His face stayed cold, but something about it had hardened. I don't want to go out, you were just about to. I changed my mind. I looked at the doorframe, looked at him, looked back at the doorframe, try again. I stepped fully into the hallway, standing outside, waving. Come out here with me. Zi Hao approached the doorframe a second time. This time he didn't stop because of changing his mind. He stopped because something, invisible but real, blocked him right at the boundary between inside and the hallway. Like a pane of glass, only he could feel. He stood there a moment, looking down at his feet, then looked at me standing outside, less than a meter away. All right. I stepped back in, closed the door. Confirmed, you can't leave. I don't want to leave, he corrected, voice a bit sharp. Call it whatever you want. I went to the kitchen for water. But to put it plainly, you're a ghost bound to this apartment, and I'm the owner, free to come and go. I turned back, looking at him. So who's really stuck here? You, or am I the one renting a room from a ghost who can't go anywhere? Zi Hao didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was a little quieter than usual. Think whatever you want. I decided to approach the problem systematically. By normal logic, I sat down on the floor facing Zi Hao. Ghosts can't move on because they have unfinished business, right? So I've heard. You have unfinished business. Probably, I frowned. You don't know what's been keeping you stuck here for 10 years. Zi Hao looked out the window at nothing but the brick wall of the next building. I know there's something, I don't know what. Then let's find out. I clapped my hands, standing up with the energy of someone who'd just found a new project. Okay, let me guess, revenge? Revenge against who? I don't know, that's why I'm asking you. I don't have anyone to take revenge on. Looking for family. I know where my family is. You know. I was surprised. Then why not go find them? Because I know. Zi Hao said shortly, as if that answered everything. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Okay, not family then. I crossed that off mentally. Hidden money you never told anyone about, a body that hasn't been found. An unfulfilled promise to an ex. No ex. None. Ever. In your whole life. Zi Hao gave me a look that made it clear the next question wouldn't be answered. Fine, private. I held up both hands. What about anyone who wronged you, like someone behind your accident? For the first time, Zi Hao hesitated, not much, just a brief pause before answering. It was an accident. There's no someone behind it. You're sure? I'm sure. The answer came too fast, too certain, like a door slamming shut. I looked at him for a moment. All right. I raised my hands in surrender. We'll table that, but fair warning, I'll figure it out. I'm not the type to give up halfway. I've noticed. Zi Hao glanced at the house rules taped to the wall where his forged signature sat. A knock came at the door while I was breaking down the last of the moving boxes. I opened it. A middle-aged woman stood there, holding a plate covered in plastic wrap, smiling the professional smile of a neighbor. Hi, I'm next door. Saw someone moving in, brought over a little food. Thanks. I took the plate, opening the door a bit wider out of social reflex. Behind me, Zi Hao stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, looking out. The woman showed no reaction. Her eyes passed right through him like he was thin air, living here alone. She asked, glancing around the apartment. I opened my mouth to say yes, the simple, safe answer, no explanation needed. But Zi Hao was standing right there, looking at me, and for some reason I couldn't say it. Not exactly. I heard myself say. I live with a roommate. He's kind of introverted, doesn't interact much with people outside. The woman nodded, completely unsuspicious. Ah, I see. Tell him I said hi sometime. He doesn't go out much. I added, not knowing where to stop. Like almost never. Lots of people are like that these days. She smiled understandingly. Anyway, I should go. Let me know if you need anything. I closed the door, turned around, set the plate on the table. Zi Hao was still standing there, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, not cold, not disdainful, just confused. Introverted roommate, he repeated slowly, as if testing whether the words meant something else. What did you want me to say? Hi, I live with a ghost. I'm not. Zi Hao stopped. Not what? He didn't answer. Just turned away, looking out the window with the face of someone trying to process information that didn't fit into any category he knew. I opened the food container, grabbed chopsticks. Why's your face doing that? Nothing. There is. Your face is doing something. I don't have a face that does things. Zi Hao said, still turned away. I shrugged, started eating. Didn't push further, but I noticed for the rest of the evening, Zi Hao kept glancing toward me, then looking away again, like he was reconsidering something. That night, I laid a blanket on the bedroom floor, still no bed, and turned off the lights. 5 minutes later, I opened my eyes. Zi Hao was sitting in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall, looking at me, not doing anything. Not saying anything, just sitting there in the dark, watching. I closed my eyes again, tried to go back to sleep, opened them. He was still there, still watching. What are you doing? Sitting. I know you're sitting. I'm asking why you're sitting there watching me sleep at 11 at night in the dark like some B-grade horror movie. I don't have anywhere else to be, Zi Hao said like it was obvious. This used to be the room I slept in. You sleep. Ghosts need sleep. No, but I'm used to being here. I looked at him. He looked back, perfectly calm, like there was nothing more to explain. I sat up, grabbed my pillow, and threw it straight at his face. The pillow passed through his head, landing on the floor behind him with a soft thud. What was that for? Zi Hao asked, completely unaffected, reflex. I lay back down, pulling the blanket over my face. You can sit there fine, I'm not stopping you, but don't watch me sleep. Look at the wall, the ceiling, anything that isn't me. A pause, fine. I lay still, listening. No sound, of course, he was a ghost, no footsteps, but I felt a shift in the air like someone had just turned their head away. Go to sleep, I said, voice already slurring with drowsiness. Or, whatever ghosts do at night, just don't bother me. No answer. I drifted off before I could tell whether he'd left the corner or not. I woke up to a smell. Not a bad smell, the opposite, actually. Something warm and clean, a bit like soap mixed with damp wood. I crawled out from under the blanket, went to the kitchen, and stopped dead at the doorway. The kitchen, which I'd left last night with an unwashed instant noodle pot, a few plastic bags on the counter, and a thin layer of dust on the shelves, was now spotless. The pot had been washed, drying upside down on the rack. The plastic bags were gone. No dust on the shelves. Even the faucet, which had been dripping slightly yesterday, was now completely dry. I turned toward the living room. Zi Hao was sitting, or rather, hovering in a seated position on the sofa, looking out the window with an expression of complete, total, absolute innocence. Zi Hao. What? The kitchen? What about it? It's clean. It's supposed to be clean, he said without turning his head. It wasn't clean last night. I don't know, I slept well. No, I didn't do anything all night, stayed in my corner, like you told me to. I walked into the living room, stood in front of him, crossed my arms. Zi Hao, look at me. He turned his head slowly with a suspiciously flat expression. Did you do it? I can't hold objects, he said, each word deliberate like reciting a law. I pass through everything, I can't wash a pot. I'm not asking how you do it, I'm asking whether you did. I don't remember. You don't remember, I raised an eyebrow. From 8 hours ago, long night. Zi Hao turned back to the window, decisively ending the conversation. A ghost's memory isn't reliable. I looked at him for a long moment, then looked down at the spotless kitchen, then looked back at him, sitting there, back straight, eyes fixed on the window with absolute attention on a perfectly ordinary brick wall, as if it were the most beautiful view he'd seen in 10 years. All right. I went back to the kitchen, got some water. Thanks. Even if it wasn't you? No response. But I noticed that brick wall outside the window suddenly became very interesting to Zi Hao for almost a full minute afterward. I waited until Zi Hao faded. He had a habit of dimming out in the afternoons, like he was resting, though I'd never asked exactly how a ghost rests. Then grabbed my phone and typed his name into Google. Zi Hao, too generic. Thousands of irrelevant results. I tried adding keywords. Zi Hao, accident, Unit 7. Nothing. I looked around the room for more clues. On the old bookshelf, there was a notebook, forgotten, its spine worn. I opened it. The first few pages were handwritten, the strokes sharp and tight, the handwriting of someone who didn't like wasting time on flourishes. A full name was written in the corner of one page. I typed it into Google. The first result was an old article, 10 years old, from a local news site almost nobody remembered anymore. Serious traffic accident in area leaves one dead. I clicked it. The article was short, dry, the kind of filler news piece. But it had a photo attached, a profile picture pulled from the victim's social media. I looked at the photo, looked again, set the phone down, picked it back up because I needed to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks. In the photo was a man, somewhere in his 20s, leaning against something, maybe a car, maybe a railing, with a half smile, the kind of smile from someone who knew they were being photographed but pretended not to notice. Black hair, slightly messy. Gray shirt, collar a bit crooked. And it was Zi Hao. But a Zi Hao I'd never seen before, not cold, not flat, none of that permanent "I've been dead 10 years and have nothing left to lose" look on his face. Just a young man, alive, smiling at the camera on some sunny day. I stared at the photo longer than necessary. That handsome, and he always makes a face like he's owed money. I told myself this was research, purely informational. I didn't know what else it could be, but it definitely wasn't this feeling that was making me zoom in for a closer look. I zoomed in for a closer look. "What are you doing?" I jumped, nearly dropped my phone. Zi Hao was standing right behind me. When did he get there? Looking over my shoulder at the screen, which was still showing the zoomed-in photo of him 10 years ago, smiling, I turned the screen off instantly, too fast. "Way too obviously hiding something." "Nothing," I said, my voice an octave higher than usual. You were looking at something. Zi Hao looked at me, not the phone, me, with the expression of someone who'd noticed something was off but hadn't figured out what. News. Just reading the news. I shoved the phone into my pocket, stood up too fast, and banged my knee against the table. "Oh, you okay?" "I'm fine, totally fine, I rubbed my knee, scrambling for a topic change. "Any topic." "Oh, speaking of which." "Speaking of what?" "Of." I scanned the room for something to argue about. My eyes landed on the wall lamp, slightly tilted. "That lamp, why is it tilted? Did you do something to it?" "The lamp's been tilted since before I—" Zi Hao stopped, looking slightly thrown by the sudden topic shift. "It's been tilted for a long time." "Has nothing to do with me, really. Because I swear it was straight yesterday." "It's not straight, it's always been tilted." "I have eyes, Zi Hao, I saw it straight." "You just hit your knee on the table, that could affect your vision." "A knee has nothing to do with vision. The nervous system is an interconnected network," Zi Hao said with the absolute seriousness of someone making up science on the spot. "An impact can affect spatial perception for several minutes." "You've been dead for 10 years, when did you study medicine?" "I read a lot." "Read what?" And so we argued about the tilted lamp for almost 10 minutes, a completely pointless debate. Neither of us actually caring about the outcome, but both of us clinging to it like a life raft. By the time I went to bed, I'd completely forgotten to lock my phone screen, and that photo was still open, sitting in my pocket the entire evening. I don't know if Zi Hao saw anything else. He didn't say anything about it. Neither of us said anything about it. I woke up with my head feeling like it had been stuffed with cotton, cold. I self-diagnosed, voice hoarse, then collapsed back down. The whole day went like that. I lay under the blanket, an extra jacket piled on since I didn't have a thick comforter, alternating hot and cold, and every time I opened my eyes the ceiling would spin a little before settling. Zi Hao stood in the corner of the room since morning, saying nothing. Just standing there watching me with an expression that, in my feverish, fuzzy state, I couldn't quite read, but it felt different from his usual cold detachment. "Hey," I breathed out, voice weak. "Stop looking at me like that, it's weird." "What's wrong with you?" "A cold, normal." "Living people get them." I pulled the jacket higher. "Sleep it off." Zi Hao didn't move, but I noticed he was standing a bit closer than usual, like he was trying to figure out what to do but had no idea. "Do you need water, medicine?" he asked with a rare hint of awkwardness. "Yeah." "But you can't get it." I closed my eyes. "Your hands go through everything, remember?" A pause. "Right?" I drifted in and out of sleep, I'm not sure how long, only that when I opened my eyes again, the light outside had shifted from white to pale yellow. Zi Hao was still there, still standing. Still in the corner, but now looking down at his own hands with the expression of someone working through a problem with no solution. "You haven't gone anywhere," I murmured. "I have nowhere to go." "Right, forgot." I gave a weak laugh, though laughing made my head hurt worse. "You just stand there then. Do you need anything?" "No, just sleep." I drifted off. When I woke again, it was fully dark, the room dim, only streetlight filtering through the window. Zi Hao was no longer in the corner. I turned my head, looking around, and saw him standing in the middle of the living room, right by the small table, staring down at my phone lying there with a level of focus I'd never seen from him, not even during our property ownership debate. His hand, passing through the phone, was trying to touch the screen. First try, through it. Second try, through it. Third try, I tried to call out, ask what he was doing, but the fever pulled me under before I could. 3 hours? That's how long it took Zi Hao to successfully order a bowl of porridge. The process, which I only pieced together afterward, went something like this. A ghost's hands pass through matter. Basic rule. But Zi Hao discovered that if he concentrated, really concentrated, to the point where his whole body felt strained, he could, for a fraction of a second, generate enough weight to touch a surface. The problem? That fraction lasted less than a second. And each attempt drained him enough that he'd dim out briefly, then have to reform before trying again. First, he tried to unlock my phone. Fingerprint didn't work, obviously, he had no physical fingerprint. He didn't know the passcode, but my phone, because I'm lazy, didn't have one. By attempt 20-something, he managed to touch the screen long enough to light it up. Then came finding a food delivery app, something that takes a living person 3 seconds. but for a ghost who'd never seen a modern smartphone, his old phone had physical buttons and had to touch fade touch again repeatedly. Took nearly an hour. He misclicked an ad 3 times. He accidentally called a random number in my contacts. Luckily, no one picked up. He dropped the phone on the floor twice when his weight disappeared mid-grab, and at some point during all this, I'm not sure exactly when or why, the living room light bulb gave a loud crack and shattered, scattering small glass shards across the wooden floor. Zi Hao, when he told me about it later with an expression of extreme reluctance, said it was not on purpose. He'd just been concentrating too hard and, maybe the energy spilled over a little. But in the end, after 3 hours, 1 shattered light bulb, 2 misdialed calls, and a level of patience I didn't think a ghost was capable of, the order went through: 1 bowl of chicken porridge, delivered to my address with a note. Leave it at the door. I woke up to the doorbell. My body was still sore, but my head felt much lighter. I stumbled up and opened the door. A bowl of porridge, still warm, sat in a paper bag right outside. No one there. The delivery person had already left. I carried the bag in, set it on the table, staring at it in confusion. Did I order this? I asked myself, trying to remember, but my memory from yesterday afternoon onward was just a haze of fever and sleep. I turned around. Zi Hao was sitting in his usual spot, on the sofa, looking out the window, in that I'm very busy looking at this wall posture I'd come to recognize. On the floor, near the table leg, were a few small shards of glass, not yet swept up, remnants of the broken bulb I hadn't asked about. I looked at the porridge, looked at the glass, looked at Zi Hao, connected the dots. Zi Hao, what? Did you do this? Do what? He still didn't turn his head, eyes fixed on the brick wall outside with the focus of an art critic studying a masterpiece, the porridge. I held up the bag even though he wasn't looking. I didn't order this. I slept all day. Could have been a misdelivered to my exact door. That happens. GPS isn't perfect. And the broken light bulb also natural, old bulb. Bulbs break at night sometimes. That's just a property of old bulbs. I stood there looking at him, still turned away, body noticeably tense, still staring at that brick wall like his life depended on not turning around. I opened the porridge, grabbed a spoon, sat down to eat. Thanks, I said, not looking at him, voice soft. For whatever naturally happened. Zi Hao didn't respond, but his shoulders, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, dropped, like he'd just let out a breath he'd been holding for a long time. I finished the whole bowl in silence. Warm, just right, exactly the kind of porridge a sick person needs. Next time, I said, setting down the spoon, if you're going to naturally do something for me again, could you maybe give me a heads up? 3 hours and a light bulb is a steep price for 1 bowl of porridge. I don't know what you're talking about. Zi Hao said, finally turning his head back, face perfectly flat, but his ears, if I wasn't mistaken, looked a slightly different color than usual. Can ghosts blush? I decided not to ask. 10 years ago, this apartment didn't look much different from now, the same living room, the same window facing that brick wall. I wasn't there at the time. But later, from what Zi Hao told me in short, hesitant fragments, I pieced together a picture of his final days. Zi Hao, 26 years old, sat at his desk with a stack of papers, typing in silence. The clock read 11 at night. His phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen. He looked at it, didn't pick up, it buzzed again. He muted it, set the phone face down on the desk. A few days later. Zi Hao had a cold, coughing constantly, but still went to work as usual. That evening, he made himself a bowl of instant noodles, eating alone in front of his laptop. There was a knock at the door. He opened it. Someone stood there, holding a bag of something. Heard you've been sick. Brought some porridge. I don't need it. Zi Hao said almost immediately, his tone not unkind but leaving no room for another answer. I can manage. It's just porridge, it's not. I said I don't need it. The door closed. Not slammed, just closed, final, ending the conversation. Another day. A coworker handed him a hot cup of tea on a rainy day. Drink up, warm yourself. Zi Hao took it, looked at the cup, looked at the person who'd given it. A silence stretched long enough to become strange. Yeah, he said finally, not thank you, just yeah. Then turned away, setting the cup down untouched. The night of the accident, Zi Hao walked home alone on an empty street. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket, unread messages from different people over several days. He didn't take it out to look, headlights in the distance. Sudden braking. The screen went dark. I got home at 7, exhausted from a day chasing deadlines, tossed my bag onto a chair and collapsed onto the sofa next to Zi Hao, who, as usual, was looking at the brick wall. "Today was awful," I said, not really to him, just to vent. The client changed the requirements for the third time. Third time, Zi Hao, after I'd already finished according to the second round. Zi Hao didn't respond, eyes still on the window. And I had to redo everything in 2 hours because it was urgent. I rubbed my face. How is it urgent when they sat on it for 3 days without responding? Silence. "Are you even listening?" "Yes," Zi Hao said without turning, flat as always. "The client sucks." "Exactly, thank you, finally someone gets it." I kept going, about a coworker, about the broken printer, about almost spilling coffee on my laptop. Zi Hao never looked at me, but every few sentences he'd give a small or HM, right on cue, like someone listening to the radio while doing something else. And then I had to send an apology email for their mistake. "Can you believe it? That's unfair," Zi Hao said. "Right, unfair." I sat up straight, energized by having someone agree. "Thank you, finally someone who." I stopped, looked at Zi Hao. He was still facing the window, not looking at me at all, but his posture had shifted, leaning slightly toward me, head tilted at a small angle, like he was trying to listen without being caught listening. "You've been listening to all of this, haven't you?" "I don't have anything else to do," Zi Hao said, still not turning, but with a hint of defensiveness. "This room is small, sound carries. You could just say you're listening, you don't have to keep pretending to stare at the wall." "I'm not pretending. This wall really, Zi Hao." "What?" "Turn around and talk to me like a normal person, would you?" A pause. Then, slowly, Zi Hao turned his head, not all the way, just enough for one eye to look at me. "Keep going," he said. "About the printer." I laughed, pulled a pillow into my lap, and kept talking. Lin Ru showed up on Saturday afternoon, bringing a bag of pastries and the energy of someone who hadn't seen her best friend in 3 months. "Finally giving me your address." She flopped onto the sofa, looking around the apartment appraisingly. "Not bad, this nice for this cheap, right?" I replied, bringing out tea, trying to keep the most normal expression possible, because Zi Hao was sitting right next to Lin Ru, close enough that if she could see him, their shoulders would be touching. Living alone in a place this big, I'm jealous. Lin Ru bit into a pastry, completely unaware a ghost was studying her with an expression of pure curiosity. Zi Hao tilted his head, examining Lin Ru up close, like he was studying some unfamiliar creature. I gave him a look that very clearly meant, move away. He didn't move away. Instead, he looked at me, then at Lin Ru, then did something I hadn't expected. He started mimicking her. Lin Ru bit into her pastry. Zi Hao bit an imaginary pastry too, with an exaggerated grimace like he was eating something horrible. I nearly choked on my tea. "You good?" Lin Ru asked, patting my back. "Fine, fine. Tea's hot." I held it in, but Zi Hao, encouraged by my reaction, kept going. Lin Ru said something about work, gesturing with her hands. Zi Hao copied her exactly, but with double the motion, completely deadpan, like a mime impersonating a news anchor. "What are you staring at?" Lin Ru asked, since I was staring at the empty space beside her, face bright red from holding back laughter. "Nothing, nothing, I turned away, burying my face in my hands. "Tea too hot. You've been drinking that tea the whole time and keep saying it's hot." Zi Hao at this point did an exaggerated sipping tea gesture, pinky out theatrically, watching me for a reaction. I burst out laughing, couldn't hold it. Tea sprayed everywhere. "Ming Ke," Lin Ru jumped back, dodging the spray. "What is wrong with you?" Sorry. I laughed while wiping the table, not daring to look at Zi Hao because I knew one glance would set me off again. Lin Ru gave me a deeply suspicious look. "You've been so weird lately, Ming Ke." Behind her, Zi Hao gave a double thumbs up, nodding with satisfaction like a director who just wrapped a prize-winning scene. After Lin Ru left, I cleaned up the table, still giggling about what had happened. "Hey," I said, sitting down across from Zi Hao, "that was fun earlier. It's been a while since I've seen you. Do something like that." Zi Hao didn't respond, but he looked quietly pleased with himself. I looked at him for a moment, then decided now might be a good time. Zi Hao, I want to ask you something for real. He looked at me, sensing the shift in my tone. Your unfinished business, the thing that's kept you stuck here for 10 years, what is it? The air in the room seemed to thicken slightly. The faint smile still lingering on Zi Hao's face slowly faded. I'm not asking to push you out, I said quickly, afraid he'd misunderstand. I just thought if I knew, maybe I could help somehow. Zi Hao looked down at his hands, transparent hands, able to pass through everything. I don't know, he said finally. You don't know, or you don't want to know. I don't know. Zi Hao repeated, but this time something in his voice was different, not defensive like usual, more like tired. 10 years. I've thought about it for 10 years. I have no family I need to see again, no grudge to settle, nothing hidden, no unspoken words I want to say. He paused. I'm just still here for no reason. Then there has to be a reason, I said gently. You just haven't found it yet. Or there's nothing to find. Zi Hao looked out the window, not the usual pretending to be busy look, but like he was genuinely staring into emptiness. Maybe I'm just stuck, no particular reason. Some people die and move on, some don't. Maybe I'm just the type that doesn't. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything he'd said before. I didn't know how to respond. I don't believe that, I said after a moment. You don't have to believe it. Zi Hao said, but without the usual sharpness in his voice, just empty. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve and a notebook. All right. I set the notebook on the table, opened to a blank page, and wrote a big title, List of Reasons Ghosts Don't Move On, Process of Elimination. I don't accept no reason as an answer. Everything has a reason. We're doing this by elimination. Zi Hao looked at the notebook with the expression of someone about to undergo an interrogation. 1. I wrote, reading aloud. Someone you love that you never got to see one last time. No one like that. Zi Hao answered immediately, no hesitation. Hold on, let me ask properly. No one, or you're refusing to consider whether there's anyone. What's the difference? Huge difference. One's a fact, the other's avoidance. I'm not avoiding anything. Zi Hao crossed his arms. I lived pretty alone by choice. No one to see one last time because I never let anyone get close enough to need that. I looked at him for a second, made a small note on the side note, personal issue, come back to this later, and continued, biting back further comment. 2. Something valuable that hasn't been given away or found. I don't have anything valuable. My things were probably cleared out long ago. I haven't seen them since. Did you check, or are you guessing? I've been in this apartment for 10 years, Ming Ke. I've checked every corner. I crossed off number 2. 3. Someone caused your death and hasn't been exposed. It was an accident. Zi Hao said, voice hardening slightly like before. There's no someone. Are you sure? Sure. I looked at him. He looked back, his eyes clearly saying, don't go there. I crossed off number 3 but left a small question mark next to it, small enough that Zi Hao wouldn't notice. 4. An unfulfilled promise. I never promised anyone anything. I avoided promises. Promises create obligations. God, what kind of life were you living? Efficient. Zi Hao replied as if it were a compliment to himself. I crossed off 4, starting to feel a bit discouraged. 5. You were never loved properly and need to feel that before you can go. I finished writing, read it aloud, and only after reading it did I realize how much heavier it sounded than the previous ones. Zi Hao didn't push back right away, didn't say that's not it, didn't say flawed logic. He just went quiet, longer than any other time. I looked at him, pen hovering over the page, waiting for a sharp rebuttal like always. It didn't come. Zi Hao, keep going, he said, voice quieter than usual, eyes elsewhere. What's 6? I looked down at the notebook. Number 5 remained uncrossed. I left it that way, said nothing, and turned the page to write number 6, but in my mind, I'd already silently circled number 5. After crossing off the first 4 reasons and leaving number 5 hanging, I closed the notebook, leaned back against the chair, and looked at Zi Hao. Okay, I said, half joking, half serious. Let me sum up. You have no family to see because you cut ties yourself. No valuable possessions because you never kept anything. No enemies by your own account. No promises to anyone because you avoided making them. Zi Hao nodded, like he was listening to a report about someone else. So, I continued, in other words, you lived a life where you lacked nothing. Owed no one, needed no one, tied to nothing. Correct. Then why, I emphasized each word, would someone who lacked nothing get stuck for 10 years over still missing something? Zi Hao went quiet. The question, framed this way, was clearly a paradox he'd never considered before. Maybe. He said slowly, lacking nothing is just how I thought about my life. That doesn't make it true. Exactly. I nodded, feeling like I'd just touched on something important, even if I didn't know where it led. So what are you missing, Zi Hao? Really? Zi Hao didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, silent for a long time, long enough for me to realize this wasn't the silence of avoidance, but the silence of someone genuinely searching for the first time for an answer they'd never asked themselves before. I don't know. He said finally, but his voice was different from the other times he'd said it. This time it sounded like an admission, not a closed door. The next evening, I was watching videos on my phone while Zi Hao looked at the wall as usual when I suddenly got up and went to the kitchen. Where are you going? Zi Hao asked reflexively, making tea. You don't drink tea? I know, I replied without explaining further. A few minutes later, I came back with a hot cup of tea, setting it on the small table by the sofa right in front of Zi Hao, even though he couldn't touch it. What's this? Zi Hao looked at the cup, then at me. Nothing in particular. I sat down, picking up my phone again. There's a cup of tea there, next to you? I can't drink it. I know, I just said that. I didn't look up, keeping my voice casual, though I felt a flicker of nervousness, not knowing how he'd react to a gesture with no clear purpose. It was really nice out today. I added, changing the subject, or maybe not changing it, just another thought along the same line. I walked past the park, saw some kids flying kites. Zi Hao didn't respond right away. The steam from the tea rose gently, dissolving into the air. I didn't pay attention to how Zi Hao reacted to the tea. I deliberately avoided looking, afraid of making him uncomfortable. But a few minutes later, when I glanced up to ask something, I saw Zi Hao staring at the cup. Not a passing glance. Staring with the expression of someone trying to solve a problem with no formula. He reached out, slowly, hesitantly, as if to touch the cup, knowing he'd pass right through it, but reaching anyway, his hand stopped, a few centimeters from the cup. Then he pulled it back, turned away, looking out the window. I pretended not to notice, kept scrolling on my phone. A moment later, Zi Hao looked back at the cup, then looked away again, then looked back. This went on all evening. Zi Hao kept turning toward the cup, then away, like he didn't know how to handle something he couldn't touch or use. But that had been placed there for him in a way no one had ever done before. By the time I went to sleep, the tea had gone cold, steam long gone. Zi Hao was still sitting there, looking at it. There was something else Zi Hao had never told me directly. I only pieced it together from scattered comments, moments where he'd slip and then go silent. I imagined it happened something like this, an office lunch break about 12 years ago. Zi Hao, 24, sat alone in a corner, eating quickly, eyes on his laptop screen. A female coworker set a lunchbox down in front of him. I made extra want to try some. This dish turned out pretty good. Zi Hao looked at the lunchbox. I have food already. He gestured at his own lunch. You could have more, I made a lot. No need. A few weeks later, the same coworker, this time with a book. You mentioned wanting to read this. I found an old copy. It's for you. I can buy my own. I know, it's just I happened to see it, thought of you. You don't need to think of me. Zi Hao said, not harshly, but with a finality, like closing a door before it could fully open. The woman stood there, book still in hand, for a moment. Okay, she said, quieter, and walked away. A few months later, the woman no longer sat near Zi Hao's desk. Another coworker mentioned in passing, oh, she transferred departments, did you know? No. Zi Hao replied, eyes still on his screen. Shame, she was a good one. Zi Hao said nothing else. But for a brief moment, his eyes left the screen, glancing toward the empty hallway she used to walk through every morning. Then he went back to work. It wasn't that he didn't reciprocate her feelings. It was that he didn't know what to do with something being offered to him. So the safest thing was not to accept it at all. That evening, after a long day, I came home, collapsed onto the sofa and, without thinking much, said, God, it's cold out. This place feels warmer than I expected. I said it completely naturally, the kind of offhand comment anyone might make walking in from the cold. But Zi Hao, sitting in his usual spot on the sofa, suddenly went still, not still in the normal sense he was always still. This was a different kind of stillness, like a machine pausing mid-task. "What?" I asked, noticing the shift. "Nothing," Zi Hao said, but something in his voice was off. "You're making a weird face." "I don't have a weird face." I looked at him, waiting. Zi Hao looked out the window, not the usual pretending to be busy look, but like he was trying to sort something out in his head. 10 years, he said after a moment, voice quiet. 10 years I've been here. No one's ever called this place warm. I said nothing, just listened. Before that, when I was alive, no one ever called anywhere I lived warm either, because I never let anyone stay long enough to say that. He turned to look at me. "You just said something ordinary, I know, but..." He stopped, unable to find the rest. "But it was a first," I said gently, finishing the thought for him. Zi Hao didn't confirm it out loud, but he didn't deny it either, and this time he didn't look away. Lin Ru video called one evening. As usual, she had a habit of checking in once a week to make sure I was still alive after moving out on my own. "How's the new place? Anything fun to report?" I sat on the sofa, phone propped against a pillow. Zi Hao sitting a short distance away, out of camera frame but within earshot. "It's fine. Normal," I replied, then for some reason kept going. "Oh, there's something funny. I have this roommate, the type who's really hard to be nice to." "What do you mean?" "Like if I leave food or drinks or do something for him, he just stands there frozen, not knowing how to react. Like no one's ever done that for him before, so he doesn't know how to receive it." Lin Ru laughed. "Sounds like me back in the day, kind of cute." "Yeah, like someone who doesn't know how to accept a gift," I said, smiling slightly. "But I feel kind of bad for him too, like he's locked himself off from any kindness, not because he doesn't want it, but because he doesn't have the skill for it." "Are you talking about you or this roommate?" Lin Ru asked, half teasing. "About him," I replied, a little flustered. I think, after the call ended, I set the phone down, turned to Zi Hao. He was looking at me, not out the window, not at the wall, looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Zi Hao had heard the entire call, not eavesdropping on purpose. Just as he'd said before, the room was small, sound carried, and there was no way for him to not hear when he couldn't leave the apartment. But this time was different. This time, the conversation was about him. Someone who doesn't know how to accept a gift. For 10 years, and for a lifetime before that, the words people used to describe Zi Hao had always been cold, distant, strange, solitary by choice, but Ming Ke hadn't used any of those words. Ming Ke talked about him like someone deserving of understanding, not because he was strange, but because he was missing a skill, like someone who couldn't swim or couldn't cook. Something that could be learned, not a flaw in his nature, just a gap, kind of bad for him. Zi Hao sat there, feeling something in his chest, a feeling he'd never needed a name for in 10 years, tighten, lightly but clearly not from pity. While alive, Zi Hao would have hated pity, would have pushed it away immediately like everything else. But this wasn't pity. This was understanding. A gentle, non-judgmental way of seeing a part of himself that even he had never looked at clearly. When Ming Ke turned around, Zi Hao was already looking at him, caught without his usual normal expression ready. "You heard all that?" Ming Ke asked, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean..." "No," Zi Hao cut in gently. "Thank you." This was the second time he'd consciously said thank you, and this time not for any specific act, but for a way of seeing. 2 days later, I brought home a small potted plant, an easy, low-maintenance one with deep green leaves. I set it on the windowsill, right next to where Zi Hao usually sat. "What's this for?" Zi Hao asked, eyeing the plant with the familiar caution he reserved for anything I brought home. "Without a clear purpose. So you have something to take care of," I said, sitting down beside him. "I can't take care of it. I pass through everything." "I know," I replied, our familiar exchange by now, "but you can watch it, track how it grows. Notice if it needs water and tell me to water it." Zi Hao looked at the plant, then at me. "That's a strange job." "Everything about you is strange. You're used to it by now." Zi Hao didn't reply, but didn't object either. That night, when I went to bed, I noticed Zi Hao still sitting there, not looking out the window like usual. but at the plant, with the same attention he used to give the sky photos. In the days that followed, every evening when I got home, Zi Hao's first words were no longer a joke or an argument starter. "It got a new leaf today," he said with a small, private pride that I'm sure he didn't realize he was showing. "Really?" I came closer, looked, and sure enough, a new young leaf had sprouted. I watched it all day. Zi Hao said, then paused, as if realizing that sounded like more than necessary. "Because there's nothing else to do, I smiled, not calling him out. "Thanks for having nothing else to do." The night Zi Hao died, I never asked him for details, and he never told me everything. But from the small fragments he let slip and from the old article I'd read, I pictured that night like this. Zi Hao walked home alone on an empty street. It was late. The streets were nearly deserted. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket. He didn't take it out through the thin fabric of his jacket pocket. Light from notifications kept flashing. "Lin Ru, you okay? Haven't heard back from you in a while. Mom, sweetheart, are you coming home for dinner this weekend? Coworker, thanks for helping check the report the other day. Free to grab food sometime." Message after message from different people at different times, but all sharing one thing. They were all invitations, all expressions of care that Zi Hao had never answered, not because he hated them. Just answering meant opening up, and opening up was something he didn't know how to do. Zi Hao crossed an intersection. Red light. He stopped, watched the light, waited. A car from another direction ran the red too fast to avoid. Brakes. Impact. The phone fell to the ground beside him, screen still lit. A new message arriving. "Lin Ru. Hey, answer me already, I'm worried." The screen slowly went dark. The empty street fell silent again. I came home after a stressful day, not irritable exactly, just tired, the kind that builds up for no specific reason. I collapsed onto the sofa, said nothing, staring at the ceiling, a silence. Then Zi Hao, sitting a short distance away as usual, asked, with a hint of hesitation like he was trying something new, "Are you okay today?" I didn't answer right away, not because I hadn't heard, but because this was the first time Zi Hao had initiated a question like this. Not in response to me venting, not because I'd complained first, just he asked because he wanted to know. I lay there 5 seconds, eyes still on the ceiling, letting the question settle. "Not really," I said finally, voice quieter than usual. "Just tired today." "Why? No specific reason." "Just some days are like that." Zi Hao didn't respond immediately, but I heard, or rather felt, him shift slightly closer on the sofa. "I don't know what to do in this situation," Zi Hao said plainly, no hedging, "but I can be here if that helps at all." I turned my head to look at him. Zi Hao sat there with the serious expression of someone who just said something that, for him, was probably a huge leap, from a man who used to shut every door on anyone's concern, now actively offering his presence as a form of comfort. "It does," I said softly and closed my eyes. "It helps." We sat there in silence as the streetlights came on outside, and this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full, in a way both of us, each in our own way, were slowly learning to name. A few weeks later, I started a new habit. Whenever I went out, I took photos. Nothing artistic, nothing for social media. Just a new vending machine that had opened nearby. A phone ad with a model name I didn't even recognize. A line of people at a bubble tea shop, paying by scanning their phones. That evening, I sat down next to Zi Hao, scrolling through the photos. "This," I held up my phone, "is a vending machine. You just scan the code here." I pointed to a corner of the image, "and your phone pays automatically, no cash needed." "Scan what?" "A QR code, that square full of black dots." I swiped to the next photo. "And this, the bubble tea place near my office, a cup now costs 3 times what it did 10 years ago." I checked. 3 times. Zi Hao looked genuinely shocked, more than he had been about the QR code. 3 times. Everything's more expensive. Salaries haven't kept up. I gave a dry laugh. Welcome to the new world. I kept swiping, a new high-rise nearby, replacing what, according to Zi Hao, used to be a vacant lot used for parking by the whole block. This was built 2 years ago. Before that, it was an empty lot, right? Right. Zi Hao looked at the photo, quiet for a moment. "I used to park my car there." "You had a car?" "Yeah, he paused, like trying to recall the model, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Probably doesn't even exist anymore." There was a brief, quiet pause after that, not heavy, just the kind of quiet that comes from realizing 10 years is longer than you thought. Want to see anything else? I asked to break the silence. I can take more photos, anything you're curious about. Zi Hao looked at me, then back at the phone screen. The sky, he said quietly, almost shy. I only ever see it through the window, same angle for 10 years. I didn't say anything. The next evening and many evenings after, I started taking pictures of the sky from different angles at different times. Sunset from the rooftop across the street. A night sky with a few faint stars, dimmed by city lights. A rare, foggy morning. Zi Hao looked at each photo, slowly, carefully, like he was trying to collect 10 lost years the only way he could. I caught another cold, milder this time, just a sore throat and tiredness, but enough to keep me sprawled on the sofa all evening, not wanting to cook. I'm hungry, I complained to no one in particular. There's porridge in the fridge from yesterday. Zi Hao said, eyes still on my phone on the table. He'd learned how to scroll through my photos himself by now, though it still took a few seconds of concentration each time he touched the screen. It's cold. Won't taste good. Heat it up. Lazy. Pause, then. I can't heat it up, you know that. I know, I'm just complaining. I buried my face in a sofa cushion, complaining for the sake of it. Zi Hao didn't respond, but a few seconds later I heard a small click from the microwave. The door, normally shut tight, cracked open slightly. I sat up, looked over. Zi Hao stood by the microwave, one hand pressed against the door, actually pressed, not passing through, his face strained with visible effort. Go heat up the porridge, he said, short, not looking at me, body rigid with concentration. I got the door open. Rest is on you. I got up, went over, took the bowl from the fridge, put it in the microwave, closed the door, pressed start. It hummed to life. I stood there, watching the plate spin inside, then looked at Zi Hao, letting out a long breath like he'd just run a distance, his weight gradually settling back to normal. Thanks, I said simply. No problem. Zi Hao replied on reflex. Then he paused. I paused too. We both looked at each other because of that no problem, the way it came out so naturally, without thought, not like his usual stiff or guarded responses. Zi Hao looked away first, toward the window. I didn't say anything else either, just stood there, waiting for the microwave's ding, with a small warmth spreading in my chest that had nothing to do with the porridge. I wasn't home for that whole week, hospitalized with a high fever. Later, when I asked Zi Hao what he'd done during those days, he only answered in a few short sentences, eyes elsewhere. But from those few words, and from the way he stood by the door when I got back, I could picture some of what he went through. The first day, Zi Hao probably didn't think much of it. Sometimes I came home late. Sometimes I stayed at the office for a deadline. The second day, still nothing. The apartment was quiet, the way it used to be quiet 10 years ago before I moved in, but this time the silence felt different. Emptier. On the third day, Zi Hao tried touching my phone, left on the table, charger plugged in, screen lighting up with every notification. A message from Lin Ru. Are you okay? What did the doctor say? Another. Don't worry about work, I already told your boss. He stared at those messages for a long time, piecing together fragments. Doctor, okay, work, hospital, no way to find out more, no way to leave the apartment to ask to do anything at all. He sat in his usual spot, the sofa, facing the window, but this time it wasn't for show. The same patch of sky like 10 years ago, but for the first time, time crawled by, painfully slow. The only difference was, this time he knew what he was waiting for. And that was new because in 10 years, Zi Hao had never waited for anyone. On the fifth night, he stood at the window for a long time, looking down at the street, searching every passerby for a familiar gate. No one. He turned, sat down on the floor near the front door, and stayed there all night. What is this feeling? He might have thought, looking down at his own translucent hands. For 10 years, he never needed a word for it. But maybe this was what people called missing someone. I opened the apartment door, a small bag of hospital belongings in hand, still a bit weak but much better. Just a bad sore throat and fever. The doctor kept me a few extra days just to be safe. I'm back. I stopped mid-sentence. Zi Hao was standing right there, right by the door, like he'd been standing there for a very long time, Not the kind of happened to be near the door standing, but the kind where someone had been waiting at that exact spot for who knows how many hours. He didn't say anything, no sarcastic. "You're back like usual?" No comment about the bag, about the fact that I'd been gone almost a week without warning because I couldn't warn him. He had no phone to contact, and I'd been too out of it to think of another way. He just stood there, looking at me. And in that moment, just 1 second, before Zi Hao could compose his usual flat expression, I saw something in his eyes clearly. Not annoyance, not the usual curiosity. It was a relief so deep it almost looked like pain. The kind of relief from someone who just let out a breath they'd been holding for days without even realizing they were holding it. Zi Hao blinked and the look vanished fast, but not fast enough. I stood there, bag still in hand, not knowing what to say. "You're back." Zi Hao said finally, voice trying to stay normal, but with a tiny tremor I'd never heard from him before. "Yeah," I replied, stepping in, closing the door behind me. "I'm back." I set the bag on the table. Zi Hao stayed where he was, not moving, like he hadn't decided what to do with himself yet. I sat down on the sofa, still a bit tired, and looked at Zi Hao, still standing near the door, still not quite back to his usual self. "Zi Hao, what? Come sit, you've been standing there forever." He didn't move right away, but after a moment, came over, sat down on the sofa at his usual distance from me. I looked at him. He looked out the window, reflexively. "You seem," I considered my words, "different since I got back." "I'm not different, you are." When I opened the door, "Your face," I stopped, unsure how direct to be. Zi Hao turned, eyes wary. "What about my face?" I looked at him directly, decided to just say it. "Were you worried about me?" The question hung in the air. Zi Hao turned his head away, fast, deliberate, staring at the wall with absolute focus on the brick wall, the way he always did when trying to escape a question. "I wasn't," he started, then stopped. I waited. "I wasn't worried," he said after a moment, voice quieter than usual. This apartment was quiet. I'm not used to silence anymore." "That's not a denial. I don't need to deny something that doesn't exist." "Then look at me and say that again," I said gently, not to push, just to see what he'd do. Zi Hao didn't look back. He sat there, eyes fixed on the brick wall, shoulders slightly tense, in a silence that stretched long enough to become its own answer. I didn't ask again. I just sat there beside him, letting the silence be, because this time it didn't need to be filled with words. That night, I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember that after Zi Hao answered with that long silence, I grabbed the thin blanket draped over the arm of the sofa, pulled it over myself, and leaned my head against the armrest, meaning to rest just a moment before heading to bed. My body was still weak from the hospital. My eyes grew heavy. I fell asleep. Ming Ke drifted off faster than Zi Hao expected. Just a few minutes after that question, his breathing had already evened out, head tilted to one side, one hand still gripping the corner of the blanket. Zi Hao sat there, not moving. He could fade, not quite sleep, but a state of dimming, less presence, similar to the resting he did during empty hours. He'd done it thousands of times over 10 years, but that night he didn't. He sat, watching Ming Ke sleep, not the kind of watching from that first night that had gotten a pillow thrown at his face. This was different. He watched the way streetlight filtered through the window, falling across one side of Ming Ke's face, the way his chest rose and fell steadily. The way a strand of hair had fallen across his forehead, untouched. The clock on the wall ticked through the hours. 11. Midnight. 1. For Zi Hao, 10 years could pass like an afternoon, and a single night could feel as long as 10 years. But that night, every moment was distinct. Every moment meant something in a way he didn't remember ever feeling before, even when he was alive. 2. 3. The window began shifting from black to deep blue. Zi Hao stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, the apartment still had the bedroom, his familiar corner, but because, for the first time in 10 years, he chose to stay in this spot, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. I opened my eyes to light. Morning had crept through the window, painting the living room a pale yellow. My neck ached from sleeping against the armrest all night, and it took me a few seconds to remember where I was, why I wasn't in bed. I shifted, stretched my back, and saw Zi Hao still there. Same spot from last night, same posture almost unchanged, like a painting no one had touched all night. Zi Hao, he turned slowly like he'd just been switched back on after a long stillness morning. I see that. I sat up, rubbing my neck. You sat there all night, maybe. Maybe, I looked at him, half amused, half disbelieving. You watched me sleep the whole night. For a brief moment, Zi Hao seemed to consider denying it. I could see it, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his mouth opened, then stopped. But then he just looked straight at me and said, in that familiar flat tone but without the usual defensiveness, my apartment. I'll sit wherever I want. The answer was so simple it was almost funny, and that was exactly why it worked. I looked at him. That answer, my apartment, I'll sit wherever I want, said with total seriousness, like quoting some law, right after sitting in one spot watching me sleep for 8 straight hours. I burst out laughing. Not a mocking laugh, not laughing because he looked flustered, though there was a bit of that too. A real laugh, laughing from the gut, laughing until my stomach hurt, laughing until tears welled up. I tried to speak between laughs. You watched me all night and now you're telling me my apartment, I'll sit wherever I want. That's, ha ha. Zi Hao watched me laugh, said nothing, just watched. Because this was the first time he'd seen Ming Ke laugh like this. Not the laugh from an argument, not the mocking laugh from one of their pointless debates about a tilted lamp or a ghost naturally ordering porridge. No guard, no caution, just joy. Simple, complete, unhidden. Ming Ke's face lit up like this, glowed in a way Zi Hao had no words for, only that it made something in his chest, if he still had a chest to feel with tighten, light and aching at once. What's so funny? Zi Hao asked, finally, genuinely confused, not because he didn't understand his own words, but because he didn't understand why they'd caused this reaction. Nothing. I waved a hand, still laughing, wiping my eyes. Nothing, just you're hilarious, you know that. I wasn't trying to be funny. That's the funniest part. Zi Hao didn't respond, but he kept looking at me longer than necessary with an expression that I, still laughing, didn't notice. That morning, after I went to the bathroom to wash up, still giggling to myself over what he'd said, I left Zi Hao alone in the living room for a few minutes. He never told me what he was thinking in that moment. But days later, from what he gradually revealed, I think I understood some of it. Zi Hao looked down at his hands, transparent, as always, as they'd been for 10 years, but something was different. He thought back to the night before, to the choice he'd made to stay there, not out of obligation, not out of fear of the empty, silent apartment like the week I'd been in the hospital. He'd stayed because he wanted to be close, wanted to watch me sleep peacefully. Wanted to be the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes, and that laugh, that real laugh, unguarded, unhidden, Zi Hao realized he wanted to hear it again. Wanted to be the reason for it again, wanted to do more ridiculous, not like him things, just to see that laugh again. This isn't about being afraid of loneliness, he might have thought. He'd grown used to loneliness over 10 years. It hadn't scared him in a long time, it was just the default state, like air, like silence. This was different. 10 years ago, Zi Hao would never have made a joke. Would never have sat beside someone all night just to be there. Would never have wanted to make anyone laugh. But Zi Hao, right now, in this apartment, with my laughter still echoing from behind the bathroom door, wanted all of it. He wanted to become a different version of himself. A version that knew how to joke, how to stay, how to let people get close. And maybe for the first time in 10 years in his whole life, he felt closer to becoming that version than ever before. The bathroom door opened. I stepped out, still smiling. Hungry yet, I'll make breakfast. I said, heading to the kitchen. Yeah. Zi Hao replied, and somehow that simple yeah sounded lighter than any word he'd ever said. It started on an ordinary morning. I was making coffee, telling Zi Hao about a video I'd watched the night before, a cat trying to jump onto a shelf and failing spectacularly, and turned to show him the clip. Zi Hao wasn't there. I startled, looked around, then saw him still in his usual spot on the sofa, but fading, not the usual transparent look. The kind I'd grown used to, where I could still see his outline, his hair color, his expressions clearly, just able to see through him to whatever was behind. This time, his entire form was dimming like a photo with its contrast turned down, like a signal weakening. Zi Hao. I set down my coffee, stepped closer quickly. He looked down at his hands. His hands, already transparent, were now almost completely see-through, just a faint outline of shape remaining. He said, his voice fainter too, like it was coming from far away. I don't. He didn't finish the sentence, but we both understood. I'd read enough about ghosts. Over the past few weeks, most of it nonsense, but one thing kept coming up everywhere, a common thread in every story. When a spirit nears the completion of its unfinished business, it begins to fade. That's the sign of passing on. I looked at Zi Hao. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything for several long seconds. Then, slowly, the fading stopped, not gone entirely, but no longer progressing. Zi Hao gradually returned to his normal level of presence, like a volume knob being slowly turned back up. Guess, not yet. Zi Hao said, his voice back to almost normal, but with a tension in how he said it, like he was trying to keep things calm for both of us. Yeah, I replied, going back to my coffee, though my hand trembled slightly as I picked it up. Not yet. I didn't ask, not yet what? He didn't ask. Why did that happen? We both knew the answer, or at least, we both sensed it faintly, like a wind that signals a coming change, but neither of us was ready to put it into words. I sat down beside Zi Hao, pulled up the cat video, and kept talking like nothing had happened. But all morning, my eyes kept drifting toward him, checking, even though I didn't want to admit I was doing it. And Zi Hao, sitting there, staring at the phone screen with far more focus than a cat video warranted, was doing the exact same thing in his own way. I was irritable the whole day, no clear reason. The morning coffee tasted fine as always. Work was nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't even raining, but I snapped at my laptop for loading 2 seconds too slow. I shut the fridge door harder than necessary. My replies to Lin Ru's texts were short enough that she had to ask, "What's wrong with you?" And I couldn't answer with anything but nothing, just tired. Zi Hao didn't ask, but all day he stayed closer than usual, not the sitting on the sofa staring at the wall. Kind of close, but within sight no matter where I was in the apartment. When I cooked, he stood near the kitchen. When I worked at the desk, he stayed in the corner nearby, saying nothing, just there. By evening, I sank onto the sofa, picked up my phone, set it down again, with nothing to do but no desire to do anything either. Zi Hao sat down beside me, a little closer than our usual distance. "You're not asking why I'm in a mood," I said, not looking at him. "I think you already know why." Zi Hao replied gently, "And I think you're not ready to say it." I didn't argue. We sat there in silence, streetlight filtering through the window like every other night, but this time the silence wasn't comfortable like before. Something hung in the air, a question both of us were avoiding. I don't remember deciding to ask. I just sat there looking at the streetlight, and the question came out on its own, like it had been waiting on the tip of my tongue all day. "Zi Hao, what?" I turned to look at him. He looked back, not avoiding, not turning to stare at the wall like he always did when he wanted to dodge something. "Do you know why you're about to pass on?" The question hung in the air. Zi Hao didn't answer right away, but he didn't ask, pass on to what? Either didn't deny it, didn't deflect with a joke like before. He looked at me, then slowly he nodded, just a small nod. But it was the first time after the list of reasons days ago, after the repeated "I don't know" of the past 10 years. Zi Hao admitted he understood. My heart beat a little faster, though I couldn't say exactly why, fear of the answer or fear that he'd known and hadn't told me sooner. "You know," I repeated slowly, making sure I'd heard right. "Since when?" "A few days," Zi Hao said, eyes not leaving mine. "Maybe longer." I'm not sure when I started understanding, only that morning when I started fading, everything suddenly became clear. "And you didn't say anything." I didn't know how to say it. I sat still, waiting. Zi Hao looked down at his hands, translucent as always, but this time he looked at them with something almost tender, like looking at something that had been with him a long time and was about to part. I used to think. He began, slow, careful, choosing each word more deliberately than ever before, that my unfinished business was something I had to do, revenge, searching for something, fixing something. An action. He paused, but it wasn't an action. I didn't say anything, just listened. When I was alive. Zi Hao continued, "I never let anyone get close. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. Whenever someone cared, whenever someone tried to help, tried to give me something, I pushed them away, reflexively, like a door closing on its own. I remember. I said quietly, thinking of the flashback I'd stumbled across, though I'd never told him about it. That's how I died. Alone, with a phone full of unanswered messages from people I'd pushed away. Zi Hao said, no bitterness in his voice, just a truth, spoken for the first time in 10 years. And I think my unfinished business was learning not to do that anymore. Learning to let someone care about me without running. He paused, looked at me. I've learned it now. Zi Hao said, voice soft but steady. Because of you, the room fell completely silent. The ticking of the clock on the wall, which I'd never noticed before, suddenly sounded very loud. I held the glass of water in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up and said nothing for a long moment. What I just heard wasn't only an answer to unfinished business. It was a goodbye, wrapped in the shape of an explanation. So, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to sound like I was just asking for information. You're going to leave? My hand tightened around the glass. Not on purpose. My fingers just did it on their own, like they needed something to hold on to. Zi Hao looked at my hand. At the glass, gripped so tight my knuckles had gone white, he didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said after a moment. Maybe that's how it works, right? When the unfinished business is resolved, the spirit moves on, right? I said, voice still trying to stay flat, but trembling slightly at the end. That's how it works. I looked down at the glass in my hand. The water trembled slightly, not from any breeze, but because my hand was shaking, no matter how hard I tried to keep it still. Well then, congratulations. I said, trying to smile, a smile we both knew was fake. 10 years, finally, Ming Ke. Zi Hao's voice cut in, not loud, but with an urgency I'd never heard from him. I stopped, looked up. Zi Hao looked at me, and this time he didn't look away. In 10 years, and in everything I knew about him through flashbacks, through the fragments of memory he'd let slip. Zi Hao had never once spoken his feelings directly. He refused help by closing doors. He accepted a cup of tea with a single yeah and turned away. He lived and died with every emotion bottled up, never spoken. But right now, sitting there, looking at me, trying to hide my trembling hand around a glass of water, Zi Hao did something he'd never done in his entire life. I don't want to go. 3 words. Simple, bare. No defenses, no joke to soften it, no turning to stare at the wall, just the truth spoken plainly for the first time in his life and in his death. I looked at him, the glass nearly slipping from my hand as my fingers suddenly lost all strength. Zi Hao. I learned how to let someone care about me. Zi Hao continued, voice still trembling slightly but not stopping, like he'd decided to say everything, however hard it was. But I never learned how to leave. I don't want to leave you here alone. I don't want. He stopped, as if even he was surprised by what was pouring out of him. I don't want to lose you, he said finally, the smallest sentence but the heaviest of all. The room was completely silent. I set the glass down on the table, hands still shaking, and looked at Zi Hao, who was looking back at me with a rawness I'd never seen from him, not even in our closest moments, and I realized we were both facing the same question and neither of us had an answer. If Zi Hao doesn't want to go, then what happens next? I looked at Zi Hao. He looked at me. In my head, there were dozens of things I could say about how this wasn't fair. About how passing on was a good thing, the thing he should do after 10 years stuck here. About how I had no right to keep a spirit here just because I didn't want to be alone. But none of those things, however true, were what I wanted to say. Then don't go, I said, just that, 4 words. No flourish, no explanation, no weighing the consequences, just an answer that came from somewhere deeper than reason. Zi Hao looked at me, saying nothing for a moment. Do you know what that means? He asked, voice small. I'll still be a ghost. Forever, maybe. I can't touch you, can't eat with you, can't go outside with you, can't. I know, I cut in. I know all of that. Then why? Because don't go isn't complicated, Zi Hao. I said, voice shaking but not backing down. What's complicated is everything after, how to live with a ghost who chose to stay, how to not regret it, how to... I paused, took a breath. But the answer to this question right now, it's simple. I don't want you to go, don't go. The simplest sentence in the world, and we both knew it wasn't simple at all. There was a moment, I don't know how to describe it, when the whole room seemed to shift, not the light, not the sound. It was a feeling like the air pressure changing before a storm. Zi Hao began to fade, faster this time, more visibly than before. His entire body dimmed, the edges of his form flickering like a candle in the wind. I jumped up, my heart pounding. "Zi Hao, I can feel it," he said, his voice growing distant, like he was speaking from an ever-increasing distance. "It's pulling the unfinished business, it's resolved." "It wants me to go?" "No," I stepped forward, reflexively reaching out even though I knew I couldn't touch him. "No, you said you don't want to go." "I don't," Zi Hao said, and through the spreading haze I could still see his eyes steady even as his body dissolved. "That's the truth." "I'm choosing." A light, faint, golden, unlike anything I'd seen before, began to appear around him like a door opening from behind. Zi Hao looked toward the light, then looked at me. And in that moment, the decisive moment, the moment when everything could end, Zi Hao turned his back on the light, not with some grand gesture, no dramatic effect. Just a choice, quiet, final, the same way he used to close doors on people trying to help him, but this time in reverse. He stayed. The fading stopped, then slowly reversed. The light behind him shrank, dimmed, and vanished like a door closing, not slammed shut, but simply no longer needing to be open. Zi Hao returned, back to his normal level of presence. Standing there, breathing in whatever way a ghost breathes heavily, like he'd just survived a battle only he could see. "Zi Hao?" I asked, voice shaking. He looked at me. "I'm here," he said, simple, certain. I sank back onto the sofa, not from exhaustion, but because all the emotion from the past few minutes hit me at once, and all I could do was sit down and breathe. The next morning, I woke up feeling like everything was normal. The familiar morning light through the window, the distant sound of traffic outside. The smell of coffee I always made in the mornings, though I hadn't made it yet, just the memory of it, already so familiar it appeared in my mind on its own. I walked into the living room. Zi Hao was there, sitting on the sofa, looking out the window just like every morning for months now. Still a ghost, still transparent, still no feet touching the ground, still able to pass through everything, still unable to hold a cup or eat a meal. Everything, physically, completely unchanged. But when he turned to look at me and I looked into his eyes, something was different. Not some big transformation, not some metaphorical new light. Just that gaze, which had always carried a thin layer of guard, a safe distance, a part of him always ready to retreat. That layer was gone. Zi Hao looked at me with an openness I'd never seen before, not because he'd suddenly become a different person, but because, for the first time, he wasn't hiding anything anymore. "Good morning," he said, just an ordinary greeting, but the way he said it, light, genuine, without that familiar flatness behind it. I felt my eyes sting slightly, for a reason I couldn't fully explain. "Morning," I replied and went to the kitchen, hiding the emotion welling up, not because it was bad, but because it was too much for an ordinary morning. I made coffee like every morning, measuring the grounds, grinding, pouring hot water, waiting for the aroma to fill the small apartment. When the coffee was ready, I took out 2 cups. I poured one for myself. Then poured the second, full, hot, fragrant, and carried both into the living room. I set my cup down on the table in front of me, then set the second cup down on the small table, right beside where Zi Hao sat. Zi Hao looked at the cup, looked at me. "I can't drink it," he said, not as a refusal, just a fact, said with a touch of awkwardness. "I know." I sat down, picked up my own cup, breathed in the smell. "But I still want you to have one, so there's something of yours there, next to me." Zi Hao looked at the steam rising gently from the cup on the table, something he couldn't touch, couldn't taste, couldn't feel the warmth of. But it was there, for him. Every morning from now on, there would be a cup of coffee sitting beside his spot, physically useless but meaningful in every other way. Zi Hao looked at the cup, then looked at me, and for the first time, not the half smile of "I'm tolerating you." Not the quiet satisfaction after making Ming Ke laugh, but a real smile, complete, unguarded, reaching all the way to his eyes. The same smile I'd seen in that old photo 10 years ago of a young man smiling at a camera on a sunny day. Such a hassle, Zi Hao said, voice light, almost teasing. I laughed, took a sip of coffee. "Yeah," I replied. "But whatever." Outside the window, morning sunlight poured in, falling across the 2 cups of coffee on the table, one being drunk, one that would go cold, untouched, but both there together every morning from now on. And that's the end of my annoying ghost roommate. A cheap apartment, a difficult ghost, and a lesson both the living and the dead needed to learn. How to be loved without running away. Ming Ke didn't save Zi Hao. Zi Hao didn't haunt Ming Ke. They simply stayed beside each other long enough for both of them to learn something neither could have learned alone. If one day you discovered your home had a special tenant like Zi Hao, someone whose unfinished business you knew, and who offered to stay forever even though they could never touch you, would you say, "Don't go," like Ming Ke did? Or would you help them move on so they could finally be free?